I was working on a video, yammering on about architecture, aesthetics, films, world building, fun stuff, when the real world reared its ugly head. I just learned the shocking news that a successful streamer had just been arrested for drug possession. I'm not going to drop names. If you all know who it is, you all know who it is. If you don't, just take it as me suddenly feeling the urge to tell some stories. Addiction is a nasty thing. It affects the person suffering from addiction and everybody around them. Personally, I've never had to deal with addiction. I've never taken an illegal drug in my life. I don't even like to take aspirin unless I have to. I handle alcohol in strict moderation. But I deal with the consequences of addiction every single day. I lost my father and brother. They both passed away within weeks of each other back in 2011. And the real sad thing, for the last 20 years of my father's life and the last 10 years of my brother's life, I refused to have anything to do with either one of them. Let's start with my father. My dad was my hero. I idolized him. You all know how they talk about fathers and sons go through 3 stages? As a child, your father can do no wrong. He's your hero. And then as a teenager, he's the enemy, somebody to be overcome. And then when the son becomes an adult, he learns to appreciate his father again. My dad and I went through that process pretty fast. By the time I was 14, my father was my best friend. The highlight of the day, after dinner, chores were done, sitting on the porch, sipping tea, telling stories, and talking. Like most of us, my dad had his demons. He suffered from bouts of depression over the years, and in his late teens, he had a brief encounter with addiction. When he joined the military, his recruiter told him, lose some weight before basic. He went to his doctor, got some diet pills, amphetamines. By the time he got to basic, he'd lost the weight. But they told him, you can't have that. He was going to fight them. No, I need those. They were like, definitely you can't have these. He said the first week of basic really sucked. My dad was in the Coast Guard. Now, a lot of people are going to say, is that really even the military? We don't know what he was doing. We do know that at one point he was part of Nixon's security team whenever he'd go down to the Bahamas. After that, it's a blank. When they were stationed in Key West, my mom said he would disappear for weeks at a time. Mom would wake up some random morning to find the house looking like Jonestown the day after, bodies stacked like cordwood. She would spend the rest of the morning fixing breakfast for everybody. After the second or third time of this happening, she asked my dad, who are these guys? My dad said, Navy SEALs. My mom said, what are you doing hanging with Navy SEALs? He said, I can't talk about that. Yeah, got it. Whatever he was doing, by the early 80s, he was diagnosed with PTSD. In 1984, we lost our farm. What happened was completely illegal. For various reasons, another whole long story, my parents decided not to fight it. But my dad never got over it. Growing up, my parents would have a glass of wine on special occasions, anniversaries and such. And during the summertime when my dad was barbecuing, he might have one beer. I never saw either one of my parents tipsy, much less drunk, ever. In full disclosure, my dad liked the ganja, weed, Mary Jane, whatever you prefer. But he was paranoid. Living in the small town, he knew the importance of reputation. So he'd have a friend come visit once a year who would drop off a packet of seeds. He'd, in a very remote part of the farm, grow his year's supply. But as kids, we had no clue. I never saw him smoke anything, much less a joint. Now, as an adult, I look back. Yeah, there were a couple of times that I'd say, he was probably under the influence. By the spring of 1988, my dad was going through another round of depression, and he and my mom's relationship wasn't in a good place. So June 6th, amazing how you can remember certain dates, my father waited until everybody went to sleep, and then he swallowed every single pill in the house. In hindsight, my dad died that day. What survived may have had the same DNA, but it wasn't the same person. The first clue is when he returned home, our evening talks changed. Because now, instead of sipping iced tea all evening, he was downing vodka. The only emotion this being was capable of was hate. The more he drank, the more he hated. It wasn't long before he was going through 2 liters of vodka a week. And the focus of his hate and bile? His family. My father was never physically violent, but the emotional and psychological abuse went through the roof. My older sister was already graduated, had already moved out of the house. By October, my brother was gone. January 1st, 1989, my mother and little sister went to stay with a friend, and I went to live with my grandmother. 6 months, that all it took. 6 months from the first time he took a sip of vodka to the point he was so abusive, so mean, so vicious that no one could stand to be around him. And those evenings that he and I would be sitting talking, I would try. At first, "Hey, Dad, have you had enough to drink? Dad, I don't think you should be drinking anymore. Here, let me put this up for you." And in the early days, it would work. He'd stop drinking. But later, it'd just make him mean. And like I said, he wasn't violent, but the abuse, the name-calling, the demeaning, ridiculing, I'd kept putting up with it. Because again, this is my best friend that's doing this. I'm watching a slow-motion train wreck. I know where this is going, and I'm only 17, but I'm trying to do my best. But after we all left, that's when he really got mean. In March, my father called me to the house. He wanted to have a meeting. He announced he'd filed for divorce, and he handed me a piece of paper. It was a written-out statement. He wanted me to swear to this to the court, lie about my mother. I was going to do this or else. Well, anybody who knows me knows I don't react well to threats. I told him in no uncertain terms what he could do with that piece of paper. Led to a pretty heated discussion. And at one point I told him, my dad would never put me in this position. He would never do this. You're not my dad. You're just a bottle of vodka. And I don't take orders from vodka. If you're ready to get some help, I'm here for you. But otherwise, I want nothing to do with you. He lost it. Started screaming at me, telling me, how dare I tell him what to do? Who was I? And then started lecturing me about all my shortcomings. I got up and walked out. So last time we had a face-to-face conversation. Apparently, as soon as I was out of sight, he got in the car and drove to the courthouse. He tried to declare me mentally unfit. He wanted me to be institutionalized. Luckily for everybody, the case was assigned to a really good judge. I was not a happy camper. The judge told me, Randy, I can make a decision now, but it'd just be better for everybody if you just agreed to go talk to a psychologist. I was like, yes, Your Honor, I'll do it. And he was like, and by the way, Randy, please try to refrain from killing your father. That would just cause a whole nother set of problems. It's like, yes, Your Honor, I get your point. The court-appointed psychologist had evaluated my father. Court ordered. He knew the family situation. He looked like Sigmund Freud. 3-piece suit, goatee, wire-rimmed glasses. I looked him up and down and said, Doc, you start asking me questions about my mother, I'm out of here. He just died laughing. He said, we don't follow those theories anymore. It's like, I know, I'm just messing with you. Sit down, I'm sipping my coffee. He leans back in his chair and he says, so, why didn't you want to talk about your mother? What? It's like, just kidding, gotcha. I'm like, okay. We ended up having a nice conversation. And at the end, he says, we're done here. I have enough. And I said, so Doc, am I sane? He said, technically, you're not the client, but I can assure you, you have nothing to worry about. Needless to say, the judge ripped my father a new one when he threw the case out. I've talked about in previous videos how I had some problems with the local police chief. A lot of that was instigated by my father. When the court case didn't work, he went and tried to have me arrested. He went to my job, tried to get me fired. He ran around town running up bills in my name. He went to all the local churches, spreading rumors, make sure I couldn't go there for any type of support. Did everything he could to make my life a living hell. And this went on for 2 or 3 years. My grandmother was a towering figure in my life. When my parents separated, she was the one I went to live with. She's my father's mother. She didn't know about the drinking, drugs, and other problems. My father poisoned our relationship, lied to her, convinced her to kick me out of the house. When she said go, I said yes, ma'am, and left. Destroyed our relationship until just before she passed away. We'll come back to that in a minute. Ultimately, my father's shenanigans backfired. On one hand, you had me, keeping my head down, just putting one foot forward, slowly building friendships, relationships, gaining respect in the community. On the other hand, there was my father, sinking ever deeper into alcohol, drugs, and other depravity. The lies just didn't hold up. The truth is always the truth. There developed a real hatred for my father. Everybody knew about our relationship, how close we'd been. What he was willing to do to me? He became a social pariah. For years, we lived within 2 miles of each other, but almost had no contact. The few times we ran into each other in town, he tried to approach me, stir something. More often than not, some little old lady, usually a cousin, would start berating him about the way he treated his family. Sometimes you just gotta love small towns. Got to the point, if he saw me, he ran the other way. In 1998, just a few days before I left for college, I'm sitting at home one evening when I get a phone call. It's my father. If I ever find out who gave him my phone number, you and me, buddy, we need to talk. At any rate, my father wanted to talk, and it was clear he was under the influence of something. Didn't take me very long to realize he was still trying to finish the argument that we'd had all the way back in 1989, 9 years before. At one point, my father asked me, "What exactly is your problem with me?" Anybody who knows me knows, don't ask my opinion if you don't want to hear it, because I will tell you the truth. And I told him, my problem is drugs and alcohol. As long as you're on drugs and alcohol, I won't have anything to do with you. The day you're ready to quit, I'm here for you. Until then, don't waste my time. Well, of course, I got the usual. How dare you? I know what I'm doing. I'm an adult. You don't have the right to tell me what to do. I can do whatever I want. At that point, I said, I want to thank you for calling me. What? I said, I need to tell you something. What? I forgive you. What? I said, I forgive you. I don't need your forgiveness. I said, I know you don't need my forgiveness, but I still need to forgive you. He hung up. That was the last time we spoke. I go off to college, and at some point I meet my future wife. We get engaged. It's at this time that both my sisters are trying to have a relationship with our father. They tell me, he's changed. He's not drinking, not doing drugs. His health's so bad, he can't do those things. He heard you got engaged. He wants to give your fiancé an engagement present. Can we bring it? This should be interesting. Yeah, go ahead. I had a great aunt who was in the Navy in the 1920s and 30s. She served in the Far East. She had sent my grandmother a lot of gifts. My Korean fiancé opened her present and pulled out a 1920s or 30s Japanese kimono. She was like, what is this? I was like, there's more. She's like, how do you know there's more? I was like, there's always more. Sure enough, tucked in one of the sleeves was a box. Inside the box, Japanese jewelry and a letter telling my fiance what a horrible human being I am. My fiance read the letter and was like, what is this? He's trying to break up our relationship. We fast forward to 2011. Both my sisters are again trying to have a relationship with their father. Same old song and dance. It's different this time. He's quit drinking. He's not doing drugs. It's different. A month after I get back from my honeymoon, one of my sisters calls me. Dad's health is failing. He really wants to talk to you. I'm like, haven't we been here before? Don't waste my time. And she says, no, this is serious. He doesn't have long, and he really wants to fix things between the two of you. It's like, well, okay, lay on the guilt. Give him my email. We'll start with the emails. We'll see how that goes. It lasted 3 emails. The third email, he brings up the argument from 89. He still wants to argue something that happened 20 years ago. He passed away 2 weeks after our last email exchange. Sadly, the only thing he'd been honest about, his health was failing. Y'all might be interested in his last few minutes. As he was having a heart attack, he got up, he moved some heavy boxes so he could open the safe. He rifled through it, pulled out some paperwork, walked across the room, and laid it on the dining room table. He died crawling across the floor trying to get to his nitroglycerin pills. What was so important about that paperwork? Remember my grandmother? The one who had kicked me out, told me never come back, never speak to her again. Well, I took her to word, and we never spoke again. After I got married, though, somebody got in her ear. She could no longer lie to herself. At this point, she was very aware of her son's drug and alcohol abuse. I mean, it was killing him after all. And he was living with her and off of her. And on the other hand, that no-good grandson that she'd kicked out, he's off doing a PhD. And he just married a woman that the whole family was saying was a real gem. Everyone was trying to figure out how I'd managed to pull this one off. My grandmother was a proud, stubborn woman. You might even say hard-headed. There was no way in hell she was going to initiate contact. And I wasn't going to initiate contact. You might say I inherited some of that hard-headedness. But what she could do, change her will. My grandmother's second marriage, she did pretty good. When Papa passed, he left her pretty well off. We're talking stocks from the 30s like Coca-Cola. And on top of everything, she still had the 330-acre family farm. And she left it all to that no-good grandson. In her mind, it was an effort to make things right. At some point, my father found out about the changes to the will. So he faked a new will, complete with forged signature that made him the sole inheritor. When my grandmother passed away, that's the will he submitted to the court. Because of my grandmother's pride and stubbornness, I didn't know about the changes to the will. So when my father inherited everything, I didn't even think to question it. His dying act was to let me know how he had cheated me out of my grandmother's inheritance. The best we can figure, in the 8 months between their deaths, my father managed to embezzle $850,000 minimum. Stocks, bonds, cash, insurance policies, you name it. And we have no clue what he did with it, where it went. And the 330-acre family farm, he gave it away to charity. Do you all know the really sad, tragic even thing about my grandmother's inheritance? My father no longer knew me. After everything my grandmother and I had been through, knowing that she wanted me to have everything was way more important than actually getting it. The only reason why I know she wanted me to have everything, my father died to make sure I knew that she wanted me to have everything. Drugs, alcohol, and hate are a potent combination. Let me tell you all about my little brother. Growing up, we were tighter than 2 peas in a pod. Our nickname was Thunder and Lightning, because you never saw one without the other. Growing up, everybody remembered my brother as boisterous, energetic, and mischievous. He was the one that brought home the pack of cigarettes that we smoked out behind the barn. Yeah, it was out behind the barn. Only time I've ever smoked a cigarette. Not my thing. My brother had a superpower. You put 99 decent people in the room with one scumbag, and in 30 seconds, he'd be hanging out with the scumbag. There was a time in our late teens when my brother wanted me to go hang out with a friend of his. We spent the afternoon at this guy's house. Pretty wife, nice kids, nice family. After we leave, my brother is like, "What do you think?" I'm like, "Isn't that so-and-so?" Yeah. What do you think? Isn't he a drug dealer? Yeah, but look at his family. I mean, he's a loving husband. He takes care of his kids, loves his wife. He's a good guy. Yeah, but he's a drug dealer. But look at his family. I mean, he's a good guy, but he's a drug dealer. Ignore that part. But look at the guy. No, I can't ignore the drug dealer part. By the way, are you messing around with drugs? Me? Drugs? No. No, I would never do anything like that. I know better. Yeah. He started like so many, partying on the weekends, a few beers, try a little of this, try a little of that. Before long, he's out of control. He'd realize he had a problem. He'd pull back, clean up. He'd even change jobs, change friends. He'd be on the straight and narrow for 6 months, a year, 18 months. But at some point, he'd go back. And each time the cycle repeated, the problems got worse. He got in deeper. At one point, it had gotten so bad that our friends got together and we grabbed him, stuffed him in a car, and drove him to the nearest rehab center. Along the way, we made it very clear what would happen if he didn't voluntarily check himself in. He got the hint. He checked himself in. It lasted 2 weeks. He got kicked out for sleeping with another patient in his room. What we got for our efforts? We just introduced him to his addict's second wife. Now he had a partner in crime. Within a year, they were both in jail. Coming out of my problems with my father, I gained a reputation among the extended family, cousins and such, especially the ones around my age, of being a problem solver, a diplomat, a fixer of sorts. I was doing everything from helping people find jobs, getting husbands and wives, boyfriends and girlfriends to talk out their problems, getting best friends to quit arguing with each other, breaking up fistfights. I even convinced one of my cousins it wasn't worth his time to go hunt somebody down. I had a lot of people who really liked me. They started to get very protective. My little sister used to complain that when she was a teenager, she'd go to some party, meet some cute guy, start talking, and inevitably there'd be a scary-looking guy step out of the crowd and yell, "Hey, are you talking to Randy's little sister? Come here." And a few minutes later, when she'd see that cute guy again, he'd look at her in terror and run. She'd come home and scream at me, "Tell our relatives to leave me alone. I hate you people." Teenagers. I'm telling you all this so the rest of the story, how you doing, Paul Harvey, makes sense. The straw that broke the camel's back. One day, my brother asked my little sister to borrow her car. We don't know what he did in that car to this day. What we do know, a couple days later, when my little sister was driving home from school, somebody pulled up next to her and opened fire. She was okay. Her car, though, it had a whole new ventilation system. She recognized who was in the car. It's a small town, after all. I knew exactly who those guys were, so I went for a visit. I walked in. "Hey, Randy, what's up? Do y'all know anything about such and such car?" "Oh, yeah, we're looking for your brother." "Because I don't care why you're looking for my brother. That's not my brother's car. My 16-year-old sister was driving that car." "Oh, no, Randy, that was a mistake. We're looking for your brother because I don't care why you're looking for my brother. My sister's okay. She wasn't hurt. The car, who cares? No harm, no foul. It won't happen again. Because if it does, I won't be the one coming visiting." "Oh, no, Randy. Tell everybody it was a mistake. We didn't mean it. It was a mistake. We're looking for your brother because I don't goddamn care why you're looking for my brother. I can't know why you're looking for my brother because if I do, I'll have to fix it. Do you want me to fix it?" "No." "Okay. Learn to read between the lines, assholes." Oh. Yeah. The very next person I went and tracked down was my brother. Laid down the law. I said, "If you're ready to get help, me and everybody else will be fully behind you. We will do everything in our power to help you as much as possible. The alternative, you're on your own." He turned and walked out. I didn't see him for over a year. About a year later, my little sister graduated high school. I told her she could move in with me, get a job, get on her feet. She didn't need to worry about paying me any rent. A little bit later, my mom was having some health problems, so she moved in too. I come home from work one day. I was the only one with a job. And there's my brother sitting at the table. My mom announced, "He's staying with us a while." It's your mom saying it, so what do you do? It didn't last 48 hours. That night, around 2 a.m., it sounded like World War III. I wake up, go downstairs, and I see my mom and brother standing in the middle of the living room screaming at each other. My little sister's sitting on the couch watching TV, trying to pretend like nothing's going on. At one point, my brother reared back his hand like he was going to slap my mother. I reached out and grabbed his hand. It's the first time anybody realized I was there. And I said, "What in the living hell is going on here?" They turned and started screaming at me. That's when I made my fatal mistake. I didn't know he was loaded to the gills on meth. I turned to my mom to talk to her. He hit me right about here, spun me around, and I dropped to one knee. He grabbed me in a headlock and bulldogged me into the wall, put my head through the drywall. If I'd been about 6 inches either way, I wouldn't be sitting here today. As it is, this shoulder hit the stud. To this day, I have almost no strength in these two fingers. I landed on the ground on my back, wedged between the couch and the wall. My brother jumped on me. I managed to get my knees up over my chest. I was afraid he'd go for the groin. But my dad had taught us, get in close, use your elbows. He was on top of me, and he had his hand over my mouth and nose, trying to suffocate me as he began to drive elbow after elbow into my temple. I can take a pretty good shot, but it was getting too much. I was starting to get tunnel vision. Things were closing in. The only thing I could think to do, I bit the palm of his hand. That really pissed him off. He grabbed this hand, and again, I had no strength in these fingers, and he put them all the way to his throat, bit down and pulled out, ripped the skin, both sides of my fingers, top to bottom, took off both fingernails as well. That flipped a switch. I launched my brother across the room with my legs. I came up. Now I'm ready to fight. I'm going to rip that little SOB limb from limb. My brother's backing off. I don't want to fight. I don't want to fight. I froze because I could see behind my brother was my sister holding the collar of my dog, Misty, a 100-pound Rottweiler who loved me with all her heart. And she was already looking at me like, "Put me in, coach. I can take him." And I knew if I put one hand on my brother and my little sister tried to stop the dog, Misty would have ripped my sister to shreds to get at my brother. I'm standing there. What do I do? What do I do? My brother starts to come back at me, seeing me hesitate. My mom stepped in between us, and she can't make up her mind who she wants to scream at more. And all of a sudden, I feel a little touch at my fingers. Everybody went dead silent. Everybody looked at the same time. Misty had come over and was sniffing the blood dripping off my fingers onto the floor. She gently reached out and very softly licked the blood on my fingers. And her head snapped, and she stared at my brother. And I don't know if y'all are familiar with Rottweilers, but when they get pissed, they puff. And she went poof. And my brother saved his own life because he turned and ran. And he ran through the dining room, out the kitchen. He had to make a 90-degree turn. And that's what saved him, because when Misty hit the linoleum kitchen floor, she skidded. He was able to get out the door and slam the door. And then you hear, bam. She was headbutting the door. She backed up, did a circle, got to the end of the kitchen, and ran and headbutted the door again. And I heard the door crack. By that time, I'd gotten in there and got to Misty and calmed her down. My little sister and I were sitting at the kitchen table as she tried to disinfect, clean, and bandage my fingers. We're looking out the window at my mom and brother in the driveway talking. My little sister said, "Watch and see. She's going to try to convince you to let him stay." We'll see how that works out. She came in a few minutes later, and sure enough, "Your brother doesn't have anywhere to go. he really needs to stay. Mom, he just tried to kill me tonight. But, Mom, he can't stay. The dog won't let him in the house. He can never be around her again. But, Mom, he's off the place in 10 minutes or I'm calling the sheriff. You can't do that to your brother. Mom, it's now 9 minutes. They got in the car and left, and I didn't see my brother for 10 years. That's just the highlights, or the lowlights, however you want to look at it. I didn't tell you all about the time I got thrown through a plate glass window, or the time I drug him into the emergency room kicking and screaming because he was having a bad reaction to whatever he stuffed into his body, or the time I pulled him out of a drug house. That one I almost caused a riot. Drug dealer types really don't like it when you take their drugs, dump them in the sink, and pour water on it. I'd warned him, get that shit out of my face. He didn't believe me. I will tell y'all, after that incident, that particular little drug den didn't last a week. I could be a bit of a handful in my youth, I'll admit. 10 years later, I'm in college and planning my wedding, and he shows back up. The whole time, he'd been a fugitive from the state of Missouri. He turned himself in. They prosecuted him, sentenced him, and then promptly released him for humanitarian reasons. His health was failing, and he had the mind of a 10-year-old. He didn't remember anything he'd done. I'm not going to get through this part without losing it, but it is what it is. I was able to spend a couple hours with him before he passed. It was like we were kids again, laughing, joking. I had my little brother back. He told me, I don't remember what I did. I know I hurt you, but I don't remember. I'm sorry. I have a friend from college who's a psychologist, and at one point, she and I got to talking. I opened up about my father and my brother. Took quite a few hours to tell the full story. Like my brother, I only told you all the highlights or lowlights about my father. At the end of my little tale, she asked me, do you want to hear my professional opinion? Sure, why not? She said, as much psychological and emotional abuse that you went through, I mean, your father's dying act was to show how much he hated you. You should be batshit insane. You shouldn't be as well adjusted. Hey now. She said, you shouldn't be as well adjusted as you are. I got to ask, how did you come through it all? First and foremost, humor. I was able to find something funny about almost every situation. But beyond that, I credit it with 3 things: friends, a wake-up call, and an epiphany. I can give you all one quick example of friends always being there when I needed them the most. Early days, just as my father's drinking was really kicking in and the abuse was getting really bad. I showed up at school one morning, and there were always these girls sitting in front of their lockers studying. I walked over and sat down. One of the girls looked over at me and said, you don't look good. She patted her thigh and said, lay your head down. Really? She reached over and just grabbed the side of my head and just pushed my head down onto her leg. And then she took her leather jacket off and wrapped it around me. And that became the pattern. For months, every morning at school, I would sleep on one of these girls' legs while the other girls guarded me, made sure no one was allowed to approach. Well, except my buddy Moose. And he would only come over and kick my boot, yell at me, quit messing with the girls, time to go to class. It was the only time I felt safe enough to really sleep. Got a half hour, 30 minutes every morning. That probably is what saved me during those early days. The wake-up call. I had a lot of anger building up, but I didn't realize how much. And then I had a very scary incident involving one of those girls who was letting me nap on her leg and her abusive stepfather. Things almost got out of hand. I scared myself. I didn't realize how much my anger was fueling and driving my behavior. Fortunately, I had a wake-up call early enough to realize I need to let my anger go. Started working on it. Took me years, but eventually I got there. Now for the epiphany part. I'd just gotten home from work one evening, was sitting down, sipping on a little bit of scotch, laying back, staring up at the ceiling. I was waiting for my girlfriend at the time. We were going to cook dinner and then go catch a movie. And at one point, I got to thinking about my father, my brother. Did this, did that. And then I got to thinking, why am I still upset? At this point, I hadn't seen my brother in a couple of years. My father, he was running from me every time he saw me. And then I realized, I can't control them. They're going to live their lives how they want. There's nothing I can do about that. The only thing I can control is me. And so why am I still upset? And I swear to y'all, to this day, I think I heard the word forgive. And I had that epiphany, that clear moment. That is something I can control. And because I thought I heard the word, I said it out loud. I forgive. And it was like the weight of the world just disappeared in an instant. I hadn't realized I was carrying the weight of the world around. And suddenly I was light. And ever since that moment I forgave, both of them, it didn't matter. They were no longer capable of hurting me. And that's when I really, truly let go of my anger. If I ever gain access to a time machine, I would definitely go back and try to do something to prevent my father and brother from falling into the hell of addiction. But I wouldn't change my life. Not a thing. What doesn't kill you makes you stronger. I am proud of where I come from, who I am, what I've overcome. I wouldn't change a thing. The most important lesson I've learned through all of this, know when to hold them, know when to fold them, know when to walk away, and know when to run like hell. You have to be in a good place before you can help somebody else. Otherwise, they're just going to destroy you as they destroy themselves. I don't know about y'all, but I refuse to be destroyed by somebody else's addictions. If you're serious and you're ready and you want help, I'm here. I'll do everything in my power to help you out. If you're not serious, if you don't want help, don't waste my time. And if you think I'm being a hard ass, have compassion for those suffering from addiction, and have compassion for those suffering because of those suffering from addiction.